It was cold the night that I fell. We were climbing the scaffolding in our quiet main street, where repurposed old buildings lined a 2-lane road for a quarter-mile or so. In them was counted a Mexican restaurant, used bookstore, floral designs, breakfast diner, a thrift store, and a few law offices and empty lots throughout. The building we were ascending was the newest attraction coming to our town, a restored theater. A major theater chain was going through our state's small towns for the purpose of finding more places to gain income for less cost than a large theater. The large metal sign was about a finger length shorter than the old church's steeple at the end of the road. Town Blue Law, which the locals uphold tightly, and we had hiked to the top of it. I was the town freerunner. It was a mission to jump this structure. I knew the risk. I climbed atop the massive sign, towering above the buildings surrounding it. I looked, breathed in the crisp night air, and turned to my friend. He was holding his camera. I waited for his thumbs up. I was wearing a very thin jumpsuit with a parachute arms. It would help curb the fall. As I stared into the moon and took my first steps, the worst happened. The sign began to give. It jerked forward roughly and sent me sliding off the edge. I gripped as best I could, but as it lurched a second time, it sent me tumbling at an awkward spin downward upon my spine. As I dazed and moaned in the light, I heard commotion. There were angry voices and loud robotic screeches. I couldn't see them, but I could hear. I faded, and awoke again. This time, I only heard one thing. Miracle he's even alive. I knew then better what was happening. I was not dead. When I finally maintained true consciousness, the doctor informed me of my situation. I peered over a broken body to see an old Indian man staring down at me. He explained I was in a short coma and now in a body cast. The worst was what came next. The insurance wanted to fight, the police wanted to convict, and the theater would possibly countersue. I wasn't able to move anything below the neck. My fiancée couldn't take the pressure and left me. I don't blame her. The lawsuits and small-town judges were surprisingly the least amount of trouble, and no one wants to convict a cripple who cries if you ask him to say his name. Pitiful, but effective. Insurance was the only issue. Through recovery and treatment they fought. Bills piled up. Thankfully, I was breezing through the walking and arm movement. Unfortunately, my voice was the issue. Through the many months, I relearned speech and it slowly came back, though not as quickly as I had hoped it would, and in a different way. When I spoke, the first time since the accident, my doctor asked, "Do you miss jumping?" I replied, "Do you miss Ganesh being a relevant topic?" My mouth hung agape. I had not intended those words for him. It just came out that way. He looked at me, braced his arm on the wall beside him, and turned away from me. Then, I heard it. The exhale. The burst into laughter. I was more stunned now than I was at my own word vomit. From there, things took a turn. He asked more questions, growing less and less amused by my bewildered responses. He laughed the first time or two, but grew angry. He looked as though he was ready to kill me as I slapped my hand over my mouth and pulled out my phone. I typed a quick and concise message. I can't control what I'm saying. He eyed me warily, made a mark in my book, and left the room wordlessly. Essentially, I was all healed. But my frontal lobe had a contusion which resulted in 2 permanent problems. I have a nervous twitch in my eye. It's funny if I do it when telling a joke, which is convenient because, well, I can only speak in jokes. The doctors can't explain it, and it is such an abnormality that they don't have a name for it. Basically, I form the thoughts in my mind, but I can only relay them via a terrible remark or crude bit. I can only speak without joking by writing. I can answer short, one-word questions without incident, but more than that, it is a problem. This sounds like a small problem, but I assure you it's miserable. I could no longer connect with people. Eventually, everyone grew repulsed by my limitless sense of humor. Needless to say, I fell into a morbid depression. I couldn't connect with others. My friends from before the fall abandoned me left and right. Even more upsetting, the theater never saw completion. Instead, they built a lounge and bar in its place. I couldn't help but feel guilty that it was most likely my fault. I spent my days lazing around my parents' house. I just wanted to die. Everything changed when an old friend wanted to take me out. He said I needed to stop moping around and get out of the house. I resolved myself to an evening with that old friend. He took me to the theater building. We sat down and ordered drinks. About that time, a man walked out on a small stage at the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen." He was a portly man in a yellow button-down. His face was red and bearded. The light reflected off his bald head. "Welcome to Open Mic Night. We've got quite a lineup of folks waiting to showcase their comedy talents. Please give a hand." From there, we watched several comedians. Some were funny, some were not. By the end of the night, the crowd was all laughed out. My friend asked, "Have you thought about stand-up?" "No," I replied. I didn't want to ruin it with a joke. "Well, you should." He took a long drink. "The stuff you say is way funnier than these people." He motioned his thumb to the now empty stage. I thought about it, and the next day I resolved to write down my funnier incidents. I spent the whole next week working on a set. I always did enjoy public speaking, and this would be a good creative outlet for my pent-up frustration. That next Friday, I signed up for open mic. I was sweating and nervous, and by the time my name was called, I felt nauseous. I walked out to a room with a handful of people paying the stage half attention. Hey, folks! I opened, high energy, swallowing the fear. From there, my set went off great. People laughed, they laughed a lot. And I felt that joy. I finally felt whole again. I bowed and left at the end of my 10 minutes to cheers and claps. The manager asked to have me open and do more open mics. I agreed with a smile on my face. From here, stand-up became my life. I drew larger crowds from my hometown, traveled to larger comedy clubs to do their open mics. I began to meet other comedians and had a great cover. I wrote, instead of spoke under the guise of lost or resting voice. I always carried a paper with, "I lost my voice. Yes or no questions only, please." One night I was returning to my hometown to headline my own show. I arrived at the theater to a full crowd. They changed the layout of the bar to seat more people within. I was thrilled. A few moments before my set, I walked outside to have a smoke. As the door closes behind me to the poorly lit alleyway behind the row of buildings, something caught my eye. I heard it before I saw it. A struggle. A woman was crying out for help as a much larger man barked at her to be silent as he collided his fists against her face. I saw their silhouettes as the man tore away at her clothing and slammed her skull into the hard pavement. As he positioned himself over her, I felt a hand grip me and yank me inside. "You're on now," the stagehand barked, yanking me onto the stage. I was so wordless, I couldn't resist. The very next thing I knew, I found myself in front of a crowd who, upon seeing me, began cheering. I stood, dumbstruck, as the words finally found me. "Somebody! The cops! Somebody is getting murdered out back!" Laughter. "I need a phone!" I pleaded, pointing to the crowd. "Miss, can I use your phone? I have to stop a rape." Uproarious laughter. This isn't funny, you vapid psychopaths." Laughing at me, laughing at my jokes. This was the biggest crowd I'd ever drawn. They were all here for me, and I couldn't disappoint. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, how are we tonight?